I'm Elizabeth, and I'm not buying books this year. This is my March no book buying check-in, where I tell you all about how I'm feeling about not buying books. So the month of March was an interesting one. I think so far, January and February were, I was high on the idea of not buying books. I was feeling pretty good. I discovered the monthly TBR concept. I was doing really well reading books off of my TBR. And I think I sort of thought everything was going to continue to go swimmingly. And to an extent it has, but I also ran into some unanticipated challenges in March, and I will get to that in a minute. First, let's talk about some basic reading statistics for the month. So in March, I was able to read 15 books. I'm actually filming this a little bit early because I'm going on a trip, and so I won't be able to film for the next week or so. So I may read another couple before the end of the month, but it's good enough. 15 is about what I normally get through in a month anyway, so that's almost accurate. So that brings my total for the year to 49 books. So I'm kind of one behind on my Goodreads goal of reading 200 books in the year, but I'm not that worried about that. 27 of those books have come off of my TBR. The other books were acquired in other ways. So for example, from the library, things that I listened to in audio, books that I purchased, and that's not breaking my no-buy purchases. Those are allowable purchases. There was one of those this month. I'm really trying to read a lot of books off of my TBR, but I discovered even at the end of January that I wasn't going to be able to make my Goodreads goal of reading 200 books with only books off of my TBR. In January, I read a bunch of KU books before I canceled that service, and so that threw me off for the whole year. So rather than continuing to feel bad about being thrown off on that goal for the rest of the year, I'm going to amend that goal. Now, what that averages out to in terms of what I've actually been able to read off of my TBR each month has been about 9 books. So instead of continuing to feel bad about my goal, I'm going to set a little bit of a lower goal for that. So I'm going to set the goal of reading 120 books off of my TBR before the end of the year. And I think that's a lot more achievable because it makes room for things I listen to in audio, things I might get from the library, and in terms of making my reading more inclusive than I'd be able to do with things that I currently have on my TBR. I was worried even at the beginning of the year that I wouldn't be able to read as diversely as I would prefer, limiting myself to my TBR. So in order to correct for that, I allowed myself to buy books with gift cards that would be from underrepresented authors that would allow me to read more inclusively. So I think that's probably a better goal in terms of reading books off of my TBR. Along those lines, 9 of the books that I read this month were previously owned, things I owned in either ebook or paperback or audio, I think. Is that right? No, in fact, none of the audiobooks were things that I previously owned. So 9 books were previously owned. 4 I got from the library. 1 I got from Audible. It was a free Audible book that I got. And then 1 that I purchased. 12 of those books were ebooks. 1 was a paperback and 2 were audio. If you have watched my previous check-ins, you know that I have a lot of paperbacks. Reading one paperback, getting through one paperback in a month is not going to get me through 569 paperbacks that I have existing on my shelves. So I really need to find a way. Last month I talked about using the Forest app to keep myself away from my phone while I'm reading paperbacks. I also talked about taking myself out to cafes for coffee and leaving my phone in the car. I didn't do really either one of those things this month. So I don't know if that's just not going to work or if I need to find different strategies. That's something that I am not quite sure what to do about. And because I am traveling for the next like week or and a little bit, and I'm disinclined to bring a bunch of paperbacks with me because they're heavy, I'm probably not going to fix that problem in April. So I will try to probably fix that problem. I'll reapproach that problem again in May. So as far as the book that I purchased, that was I purchased and read. That was American Dreamer. I bought it. I read it. It was great. I did exactly what I'm supposed to do, which I bought it when I was ready to read it, and then I read it. And that's the goal going forward for all of my books. What I'm hoping is any book that I pick up, I will read immediately, rather than letting them accumulate. And sort of start to make use of perhaps a system where I add books to a wish list or a spreadsheet or sample them, so that I'm not purchasing things that I'm not immediately ready to read just because they're interesting in the moment, but I'm reading something else, or if they're on sale, or any of the other reasons that I pick up books. As far as the subgenres went, I read 7 contemporaries, 4 historical romances, and 4 historical paranormal romances. One of those contemporaries I would call a vintage contemporary. That was Who's the Boss by Jill Shalvis. That was written 20 years ago, and so in a lot of ways it doesn't necessarily read exactly like a contemporary. It's sort of like an old contemporary, so it's a little bit in its own category. I also don't count the historical paranormals as historical romances because the point is less the history and more the paranormal. But they also aren't like contemporary paranormals or like typical paranormal romances set in the future or an alternate universe. These are distinctly set in the past. And those were 3 by Kristen Callahan and then 1 by Jordan Hawkes in the Wyborn and Griffin series. I also decided this month to do something that I haven't done in the past. I had sort of been relying on my own inclinations to steer me toward books written by underrepresented authors. I, in the wake of the RWA Rita thing, and if you're not familiar with that, I will link my This Week in Romance from last week in the cards so that you can sort of get yourself up to speed on that, because I don't want to go into that here. I don't have the time in this video, but I wanted to take a look at my reading and decide whether I was really doing an adequate job of reading diversely. And what I discovered was that this month I read 2 books by Latinx authors, 1 by a Black author, 1 by an Asian author, and 1 by an LGBTQ plus author, specifically non-binary author. So that was 5 of 15 books. I think I'd probably prefer that number to be closer to half and half, so maybe 7 or 8 books out of 15 rather than 5. So in the future, what I've decided to do is I'm going to go back and forth between underrepresented authors and white cishet authors, and I'm going to try that for a little while and see if that doesn't get me to a point where I'm at least reading more half and half. So I'm not really entirely sure what my goal should be, but I didn't also want to wait to like accumulate data for an entire year or something before I started to make changes to my reading habits that way. It's been long enough. It was time. So a couple of things that I've touched on so far, but that I haven't gone into in detail. I am buying books with gift cards from underrepresented authors. So far this year, I've gotten $46.15 in gift cards. I went ahead after last month and freed myself from using that necessarily to purchase from Amazon. I wanted to be able to purchase from other sources, and that worked relatively well. So rather than just sort of using the gift card balance as the basis, I'm actually keeping track of this in a spreadsheet. And this month I spent $30.44, so I've got $15.71 left in terms of that spending. I bought American Dreamer by Adriana Herrera. I bought I Sand by Mary Ting. And I bought Final Summer, which was written in part by Vivian Stevens, who was one of the founders, one of the co-founders of RWA. And then Adonis Line by Dakota Gray. Like I said, Final Summer hasn't arrived yet. I ordered that one used. I'm in the process of reading Isan, and I had already bought Adonis Line as I was finishing American Dreamer. So I'm a little bit off, but I'm just going to read those things in quick succession as I get them, so that'll be okay. I also alluded to the free book that I got from Audible. My Audible subscription is allowed under my no-buy. I tend not to accumulate audiobooks because I kind of listen to one and then get another one. And in the past, I had kind of been using the Audible Romance package, my Audible subscription, and the library, depending on where those things that I wanted to listen to were available. I actually joined another library system where I could get Hoopla books. So I went ahead and canceled my Audible subscription. I am still feeling pretty good about that. I have, I think, one Audible book that I purchased before canceling my subscription that I'm sort of partway through that I'm listening to. I have two in the Troublemaker series by Suzanne Brockman that I was able to get from the library. And I think when I run out of Troublemaker books, which is going to probably take me a while because they're long, and I can't always get them, one after the other right away, I will finally look into how I sign into Hoopla, which I haven't done yet. So I think so far the idea of canceling Audible is working out fine. I am leaving myself the option of rejoining if I decide that it isn't fine. But so far I would doubt that that's going to happen this year. Nextly, that's not a word, nextly. Anyway, the next thing I want to talk about is Temptations. And this is one of the reasons why I felt like March was a little less effective than January and February have been. And the reason is that I had a couple of really serious temptations this month. The first one actually happened very early in the month, and it isn't something that I necessarily talked about anywhere because it was just sort of like taking place within my own heart. I was talking about con artist heroes and heroines online, and somebody brought up Confidence Tricks by Tamara Morgan. Now, I love Tamara Morgan. Hang on. I have a keeper shelf here behind me, including this book, Stealing Mr. Right, and I have the other ones in ebook, the other two in this series. But this one was signed at a conference to me, so I kept this one in paperback with the idea that I might one day want to reread it because I loved it. And so I really love Tamara Morgan, and I particularly love her take on, I would say, kind of morally ambiguous characters. And the hero and heroine of Confidence Tricks is a con artist heroine and a thief hero, and it was free. It was a free ebook. Free ebooks are one of the ways that I have accumulated more things than I can read, more things than I would truly enjoy. One of the ways that I have fooled myself into thinking, oh, I'm just trying a new author, or, oh, I'll just get it, and that way if I want to read it later, I have it. And it's a way that, it's one of the things that I'm trying to curb in terms of my book acquisition this year. The thing was, the thought crossed my mind that I could download this book for free and never tell anybody. And that was like, oh no. That's not the point of this at all. That's cheating myself. That's cheating you guys. So really what kept me honest was the idea of doing this check-in. So I just have to say thank you to you guys, to anyone who's willing to watch me ramble about not buying books for 20 or 25 minutes, however long this video ends up being. And say thank you for keeping me honest, because I really am committed to this. I really want to try to read the books that I have and see how that goes. I really don't want to continue to accumulate things that I'm not ready to read. And if I wasn't going to tell anyone I was going to read this, then I wasn't going to be able to read it right away. I was going to have to, hold on to it for a year and forget all about it? That defeats the entire purpose of this project. So just thank you, you guys, for keeping me honest and accountable, which is the entire reason I decided to do this on YouTube in the first place and not just make a private project out of it. The next temptation, which by the way, if you guys are interested in the things that have been tempting me, and I'm sorry to do this to you, but I am keeping a spreadsheet and it is available online. I'll link it below. And I've sort of color coded it and put the things that I'm interested in acquiring, just to sort of mitigate the FOMO aspect of this project. So if you are interested in those things I've passed up, then you are more than welcome to look down below and check that out. Anyway, so the next temptation that I had was that I went to a Polycon. I talked in some detail about my Polycon experience and the books that I acquired in my Polycon book haul, and almost a third of that video, I would say, was devoted to kind of like an Polycon post-conference check-in on how I felt like that impacted my no book buying year. So I talked about a few things. I alluded to what I'm going to talk about now, but I didn't go about it in any detail. So I'm going to detail it a little bit here. I felt really guilty, you guys. Like, I did not intend to acquire 14 books at this conference. And when I looked at that number, I felt a little sick, because that's entirely the point. The point is not to acquire, especially paperbacks, that I won't read. The things that I didn't feel guilty about were the gifts from Kristen Callahan. So she gave me the entire Darkest London series and signed it, and I love that series. I love that series enough that I know I would have gone and purchased it in paperback for my keeper shelf at some point anyway. That was going to happen regardless. So that's, that was just, that has no guilt attached to it at all. The other thing that I don't feel guilty about is acquiring the book I Stand by Mary Ting. I feel a little bit silly because then I discovered that it was actually available cheaper in ebook, and ebooks are of course easier for me to read, so I probably could have, gotten it in ebook and gotten through it a little bit quicker. But what was great about it is that I got a chance to talk to her, and she signed it, and so far I'm not very far into it yet, but so far it's pretty interesting. And so, that is low on the guilt scale. Everything else I wasn't supposed to acquire. And so that was a super big learning experience for me. One that led me to a couple new rules for my no book buying year. And those are rules surrounding books acquired at conferences. So I decided that I would acquire no more than 15 books. So I'm going to have to prioritize in terms of what I actually acquire. And these are free books, by the way. These are not purchased books. So these are things that are out on tables or handed to you during events, or that you get at free signings. I mean, those are the kinds of things I'm talking about, because I still do have the financial goal of not buying books. And I'm going to have to read those within 30 days. And if I don't read them within 30 days, it probably means I didn't want them very much, and that I can release them into the world for someone who would appreciate them more, who would be more desperate to read them than I am. So I did set new rules, and I had to walk through the feelings of guilt behind setting new rules, behind trying to figure out how to work this into my no book buying year. And I did. The video helped in terms of walking through how I feel about things. I'm an ENTJ, if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs. I have to talk about things in order to figure out what I think about them. If you're a complete introvert, that's probably completely foreign to you, and you're probably like, what? Why would you have to do that? But I do. And usually my husband is that, and now, of course, you guys, talking to the camera, talking to you through the camera. I am not going to stop going to conferences. Conferences, as long as I continue to be a member of the bookish reading, reviewing community, are going to be a fact of life. Free books are going to be a fact of life. Free books at conferences is one of the ways that I have accumulated a large number of paperbacks. So thinking that through and thinking through needing to figure out what I was going to do about that was a really good exercise. It was a good way of thinking about, how am I, rather than letting that ambush me again, because it's bound to happen. I'm going to attend an event. I'm going to run into author friends. I'm going to go to another conference, whether it's this year or next year or at some point in the future. And I need to have a strategy for that, for not acquiring more things that are just going to take up space in my life and prevent me from, having the things that I want in my reading life and elsewhere. So I think it's good that happened. And I'm feeling a lot better about it because now I have a strategy. I have a plan. I have an idea for what to do when that happens, because it will. So that was good. And I feel a lot better about it now than I did when I made that Polycon haul video a week ago. Okay, so the last point. I have been thinking in terms of social media and my feelings on being on social media. On the one hand, I love it. All of my friends are there. Well, not all of my friends. I have in-person friends too, both bookish and otherwise. But I have a tendency to. Well, let me back up a little bit. So this project was in part inspired by Hannah Louise Poston, who is a makeup YouTuber, who did a no-buy year last year. And I talked about her also in my Polycon video. And the reason is her walking through some of the things, the reasons behind her no-buy year, made me think about some of the things that I do to kind of cope with life. And for her, it was perusing new releases and the sales section and going to Sephora and purchasing makeup as a way to make herself feel better about herself and the world. And a way to cheer herself up. And I don't really shop that way. I don't shop that way in terms of like buying books for sure. Like I don't go on Amazon and peruse the various categories. I don't subscribe to a bunch of sale newsletters and go looking for things to want, as she says. I don't do that. It's just not something I do. The way that I acquire books is primarily through social media recommendations, either on YouTube or Instagram or Twitter, which are the three places that I spend the most of my social media time. And it got me thinking about how I use social media and how I change that behavior, and if I want to change that behavior. So it got me thinking about a few things. So first of all, I do use social media for work. Let's call it work. I'm not making, obviously, I've told you how much I made in gift cards. I'm not making a ton of money, but in terms of the work that I do within the bookish community, I have some hashtags, some chats that I do. I have promotion of my videos and blog posts and reviews and books and things that I'm excited about. I have questions that I like to ask the community about sort of, vintage romance and the romantic structures and for example, a good example is that I was just talking about the story structure of Suzanne Brockman's Troublemakers books. And I hopped on Twitter to ask an academic romance friend of mine, Dr. Laura Vavenko, who's extremely knowledgeable. And if you don't follow her and you're at all interested in academic romance stuff, you absolutely should. I'll link her Twitter handle below. She's very, very knowledgeable, and I wanted to ask her a question about whether anybody had done kind of work on that, because it's such an interesting story structure. So those kinds of things I feel like are legitimate uses of social media, legitimate productive uses of social media that add things to my life. What I'm talking about is unproductive uses of social media. So what I'm talking about is those times when I'm sitting on the sofa and I don't really have anything else to do, and I'm either bored or sad or frustrated or overwhelmed, using scrolling Instagram or scrolling Twitter or watching YouTube videos as a way to assuage and calm my feelings. And it occurred to me that there might be better ways of managing feelings than distraction. I don't know what those are. At least not for me. I got into this habit, I would say particularly after the 2016 election, of using social media as a way of making myself feel better. And I've gotten more and more uncomfortable with the amount of time that I spend doing that. The amount of unproductive time that I spend doing that. I'm not sure how to manage that yet. I asked on Twitter about perhaps an app that would let you put in why you're accessing that app at a specific time. Because I'm afraid that if I try to chronicle it any other way, like in a spreadsheet or whatever, that I won't even notice. So I think probably I'm going to start with one of the apps that just lets you know how much time you spend on each app or on your phone, because that really seems to be kind of the only option out there right now. And do some reading on social media addiction, because I kind of feel like that's a thing. So that's where I am with that at the moment. I'm sure I'll have more to talk about on that score next month, because I'm really just sort of at the beginning of thinking about that and about how that plays into my wanting more things, and in this case more books than I can really reasonably consume. So that's about it for my March check-in. I hope this has been in some way interesting or educational, or has helped you in some way. It certainly helped me, and again, thank you for that. If you did enjoy it, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Leave me a comment, especially if you have thoughts or ideas about managing social media in a productive way. And have a good week. Doubt not, slay some words, and Lex has your back. Bye.